Welcome to the Procurement Software Podcast, where we aim to educate and inspire you about how technology is changing and shaping our profession. The truth is, there's never been a more exciting time to be in procurement, but only if you're one of those organizations that's embracing the change and driving new developments. And this podcast is all about giving you the tools to help you get there. So buckle up and let's get right into this week's show. Yes, hello. Welcome to another episode of the Procurement Software Podcast. We've got a guest episode for you today. Not had one for a couple of weeks now. So I'm back in the chair with a guest on today's episode. And on the day that I'm recording this, it's actually the 1st of October, which is the first day of Q4. And the reason why I'm telling you this is because my guest today is Paul Gurr, who is founder and managing director of Provalido. Provalido are a procurement performance management platform. So with Q4 just kicking off, which is typically budgets and pipeline season, I thought this was a really opportune moment to have this conversation. So today we're going to be talking all about pipeline management, putting together your pipeline, defining your pipeline, aligning it with your stakeholders, some of the different types of savings and how to report them, and some watch out tips and tricks, and how to, of course, optimize that with using market-leading software. So, Paul, very warm welcome to the podcast.
Hi, James. Yeah, happy to be here.
So, quick intro question that I do with everyone that comes on the show. You're a CPO in a mid-sized business with no digital procurement tools in place. And by way of a miracle, you've managed to get your CFO to give you $50,000 to go out and buy some procurement tech. What would you spend it on?
Well, it is a tough question because it does depend on the situation that you're in, the kind of organization you're in. Is it a manufacturing company? Is it a service company or sort of public sector? For me, procurement tech should really do three things. It should bring control, it should bring efficiency, and it should bring knowledge through visibility. So I'd really look to see, well, where can I get the best bang for my buck on those three things? For me, something fundamental would be a P2P system if one doesn't exist. So at least that gives you all those three things: control over of what you're buying, efficiency in terms of better than paper requisitions, etc., and then visibility on what you're actually buying, and then you can build from there. So depending if I had anything left over, I've not bought a P2P system before, so I don't know what you get for 50 grand, but depends on the size of your company. If I had anything left over.
Shameless plug, reach out to me. I do know. So if you're listening to this and you're wondering what you get then.
And from there, probably build on the spend visibility and then look at things like sourcing and procurement performance.
Awesome. Okay. So how did you get into procurement? Because we're both ex-procurement professionals. So what's your story in terms of how you got into the profession and ultimately how you came out of it by founding your own business?
Yeah. So as with, I think, every single procurement professional I've ever met, I accidentally ended up in procurement. So left university and had no real idea what I was going to do. I had a business studies and Scandinavian studies degrees. I did apply to IKEA, but didn't get anywhere there. And I basically ended up with a 3-month temporary contract as a scheduler, really, rather than a procurement person at an electronics company. And that 3 months ended up being 3 years or so there. And from there, really, I kind of realized it was quite an interesting thing to be in. I wanted to get more into the strategic sort of side of procurement rather than just sort of scheduling components in and pricing those. So then my next move was into a more category management role. And from there, I've stayed in procurement now for 30 years. So Provalido started 11 years ago. So made the decision to leave procurement. I had been a consultant for the last sort of 10 years or so before that. I had really enough of traveling around and being away from family and that kind of thing. And had been struggling with spreadsheets, reporting, saving, both as a practitioner and as a consultant. And that's where the idea for Provalido came along, and decided to give it a go at developing a web app and seeing if we could help other people.
So obviously it's come on a lot from when you originally started it. What was it, 10-ish years ago? So I gave a very brief introduction in the intro spiel that I did, but just tell the listeners a little bit more in terms of the value proposition typically of what they get from having essentially a performance management tool?
Yeah, well, I mean, Provalido helps organizations plan, manage, and then report on all their activity, primarily cost reduction activity, but it doesn't have to be that. It can be other value add projects procurement's involved in or ESG type projects, that sort of stuff. So really trying to help the process right from a very rough idea of this might be a potential opportunity to actually a delivered saving, and then helping manage that process, track changes that have happened, track whether things are on time or not, whether the forecasts have been accurate, and are they to target. So it brings a number of benefits. That helps collaboration within an organization, having everything in one place. Should help drive more savings through, brings control to your process with stage gates approvals, that sort of thing. And the game really is to build trust in what procurement is delivering. So when procurement showcases all the benefits that it's driving, that the organization believes that the numbers that are being reported.
Yeah, I'll come back onto that one in a second, because I do think that's critical in terms of the wider discussion around savings management. But I just wanted to, before I dive into that, you've actually got a white paper on your website that I read preparing for this. And it said that you've analyzed 3 years worth of data across 68 of your customers to try and build a logical list of financial benefit types that procurement typically can have some influence over or even directly deliver, which would be relevant to the majority of organizations. Can you just walk us through how you would group those together and how you would define these wider benefits?
Yeah, so from a broad perspective, we feel that procurement can help deliver 4 broad types of benefit to an organization. First one being financial benefits, which is primary focus of our tool, but it's also historically been the primary focus of procurement departments, for better or for worse. We're not all about savings, as we like to say, but they are a big part of what we do. They're just not the be all and end all. But on top of those sort of direct financial benefits is a risk reduction. So risk in the supply chain, de-risking pinch points, making sure things are spec'd in a way that provides market liquidity, gives various options, monitoring geopolitical events and making sure there's limited exposure to those. The third thing is efficiency. So basically just making it easy for your organization to buy stuff, whether that's with tech, which it normally is, but combined with a good process, making sure you're not seen as an obstacle to buying things in the right way, but more an enabler and a helper as a department. And then the fourth thing more recently has come on is the ESG benefits. Most certainly medium and large organizations have targets around those, both environmental and sort of community benefits and those sorts of things. And procurement has definitely a big part to play in that and help from a supply perspective achieve those goals.
Fantastic. So that's put it really nicely into context. And when we talk about procurement performance management software, we are, of course, talking primarily about the financial benefits group out of those 4 that you just mentioned. Tracking risk reduction or risk mitigation and ESG, as you quite rightly said, critical to the wider business goals, but it's hard to put a dollar value on them. Whereas those types of performance metrics are always going to be somewhat softer. And then I guess the other one that you mentioned, which was transactional efficiency, kind of sits between the two. Some of those can be put into an ROI and a dollar number, especially if we're talking about reducing headcount or maybe better deployment of those team members into more strategic roles, especially when I think about more senior procurement roles that often get dragged into administrative stuff. But for now and for the sake of this podcast, we're going to drill down on the financial benefits primarily. So I wanted to then look at how you break down those financial benefits. How do we build bridges with finance who sometimes views procurement and the way that we report everything as, in inverted commas, savings with a degree of skepticism? Break that down for me and talk about how you can put those financial benefits into different buckets and how you indeed do that within Provalido.
Yeah, and it's a complicated thing. When we looked at the 68 customers that we analyzed, I think there were over 260 different benefit types or names for benefit types that were being reported. So it's a huge thing to try and condense that down. But when we did that, from our view, financial benefit breaks down into four main types. There's a reduction of costs that you've previously incurred. So you were paying X, now you're paying Y. There's the avoidance of costs that would otherwise be incurred. So you're not really changing your bottom line, but you're keeping the bottom line the same or mitigating the impact. There's then delay of cost incurred. So you're effectively paying the same, you're just paying later. So you have a cash injection of some sort. And then the fourth thing is not really bottom line, it's top line. So it's where procurement can affect the top line, increase revenue. And there are various ways. Not every procurement department can get involved in that, but when you can, it's quite exciting. And it's certainly something that procurement should be able to contribute to, certainly in larger organizations. So we broke it down into those four things: reduction, avoidance, delay, and increase of revenue. And then because reduction of cost is probably the biggest area and our analysis shows that that's where a lot of focus are, we actually split that further down into two types, and we call it price-focused cost reduction, where really all you're doing is trying to find the best price. It's the same product. Maybe you're buying it from a lower cost place or somewhere it's more efficient. And the other one is cost-focused cost reduction, where you're actually, as procurement, you're actually doing something to reduce the cost and therefore the price follows that.
So price-focused reduction would be moving from supplier X to supplier Y or just having a straight up horse trading price negotiation with an incumbent vendor, whereas cost focus is more around value engineering or specifications or demand management, demand control, that type of thing.
Yeah, I think price focus would be either your traditional, your fist on the table and demanding the best price. Can be resourcing. It can be commercial restructuring as well. We call it that, where you give incentives for a supplier to reduce the price. So maybe it's giving a longer contract period. It's maybe, giving a broader platform for them. It may be just soft things like, you would be willing to use as a reference, right? And that sort of thing, which can be very valuable certainly to a small supplier. It doesn't really cost you anything if you can get your marketing department to agree to that. So maybe giving things away for free, but you're getting a reduced price from the supplier for that. But it tends to be things where you can't really influence the cost. So, things like office supplies or things that are very commoditized, and the job is, as a procurement organization, is to find the best price for that particular thing.
Okay, so I think those two are clear. Cost avoidance, which is the other one, I think will be pretty clear to most of our listeners. Can you give maybe a couple of examples of the other two buckets? So you got working capital improvement, and then the top line or things that contribute to an increase in revenue. Those may not be as familiar to someone that's listening to this. So can you maybe just walk through a couple of concrete examples, without having to say who the customer is? Give us maybe a flavor of what those typically involve.
Yeah, cash flow improvements, I think something that would be familiar to anyone who's worked in procurement any length of time is increasing payment terms.
Yeah.
I've lost count of the number of organizations I've been in where we've had a drive. Let's tell all our suppliers we're going to move them to 60 days or let's do 90 days. So, that's an obvious thing. It's a one-off cash injection.
That's a short payment term if you're in Italy.
Well, it's a legal thing, isn't it? In some countries, I was at a customer the other week and they have payment terms, but they have something called the legal maximum or something. So I think in Germany, is it 30 days or something like that, depending on the size. So there are some legal restrictions on that. But typically that is the most obvious one. Is let's ask our suppliers or force them by asking them to move to a longer payment term. A more subtle way of doing that is more looking at your logistics, how you buy things, consignment stock, those sorts of things. So just either getting the goods or the services later when you actually need them, or arranging a way where you actually pay for them as you use them. So that would be your cash flow improvement. An important thing with that is how you actually report that and measure that as well, because we do see some people reporting it in error as, you move things out 30 days, they take 30 divided by 360 of the annual value of the contract, which is not actually right. That's not the cash injection. You then have to look at your cost of capital and what are you actually saving by having that cash rather than having to borrow it or whatever. So it's that the benefits from that are actually sometimes a lot smaller than you might think if you report them properly. But if you do it across the board, then obviously that can add up. From a revenue increase point of view, that can be bringing innovation from the supply market to the company. So it could be something that improves your product or service because you've got a supplier that can do something in a great new way, and that could therefore increase your sales. So it could be bringing that innovation, which as you've got the direct contact with the suppliers, or it could be things like asset sales, recycling, finding ways to use waste in innovative ways. One of the best examples I came across early in my career was using scrap from toilet seats to blast at aircraft to clean them. So you never know how your scrap might be used.
Never come across that one. But yeah, I used to buy, back in earlier days of my career, I used to buy non-ferrous metals. And part of my role was actually selling non-ferrous scrap, because when you look at it logically, I was probably the person in the company other than finance and treasury that had the most knowledge of metals markets for that type of commodity. So it kind of made sense, even though it was essentially selling. So yeah, that was also a revenue driver, essentially, if we were able to separate the scrap or sell it to a dealer that would give us more money for it. So yeah, okay, that's fantastic. So I love that, because it's given some concrete examples. So to summarize then, we've got 4 different ways that you identified that procurement typically drive value to a business. Of those, realistically, the only one we're going to report objectively in a tool or in an Excel spreadsheet for that matter is financial benefits. Financial benefits then typically fall into 5 broad buckets, which you've just described and given a few examples of. And that will determine typically, those 5 buckets will typically determine how finance and the wider business views, I won't say savings, but cost reduction or cost mitigation activities, because in pure finance speak, not all of them are savings. So we're recording this, as I mentioned, on the first day of October, which is the first day of the 4th quarter, which is obviously budgeting season. An apt question for this time of year would then therefore be, how do you then approach putting a pipeline together, working off of what you've just told me, that you've got 5 broad financial buckets that you can put projects into. So can you maybe walk us through how you go from a brainstorming exercise within procurement through to having a final savings plan that's visible and aligned and signed off by the wider organization?
Yes, sure. And it is a bit of a journey going from a rough idea through to that sort of firmed up forecast that you're confident with. But it's important to share as many rough ideas as you can at the beginning. So we would encourage every organization to have an ideation process, or whatever you want to call it. That should be separate to your main forecast, should not be combined with your forecast, certainly initially. An important step is trying to include as many people as possible. So not just procurement, but spread that out across the different departments, get stakeholders involved, your CTO, your CMO, whatever departments you can get involved. And not everyone will be interested in doing that. And some people may be a little bit defensive. I don't want my budget cut, blah, blah, blah. But if you can frame it more as, well, actually, this will enable you to get more with your budget, because you won't have to spend as much on this and this, and you'll have something left over, then that is potentially a good way to frame it. So we're here to help you. We can save money in certain areas. You're going to have more to spend in others. So get everyone you can involved. Don't just think about price reduction. Obviously, think more widely than that. Make versus buy, repair versus new. Can we reduce demand? Can we improve efficiency? And then also obviously tap into your supply market as well. So suppliers often have good ideas. Communication, backwards and forwards, is not always great with all your suppliers. So to see what they can provide. And a lot of the time, suppliers will be really willing to provide ideas for reducing cost. As long as they can keep the same margin, they're absolutely happy if the cost can be reduced.
When would you do that then? So from assuming the initial ideation exercise would be an internal sort of procurement brainstorming, when the CPO typically goes to his team leaders and or her team leaders and says, empty pockets for next year. At what point from there would you then approach A, your stakeholders, B, your suppliers, and C, your colleagues in finance in that holistic process?
Yeah, I think it's as early as possible, but I'd actually be a big advocate for saying this is just a continuous process, and that if you have a good ideation pipeline process, that should just be getting topped up throughout the year, and that any time you have a review with a supplier, you can talk about that, you can add to it. If you've got a good relationship with your stakeholders, they should be providing you with ideas as you go. So actually, it's best just to keep that going as a continuous process. I think the thing you need a timing on then is, okay, what ideas are we actually going to work on? How are we going to deliver that next year? And that maybe depends a little bit on the size of your organization. Do you do that 6 months before the start of your new financial year? Do you do it 3 months before? Obviously, we're 3 months or so away from most people's financial year now, so it's a good time to do it for most organizations. And then it's looking at those ideas. You're going to have some terrible ideas probably in there, but you're going to have some really good ones as well. So it's, well, how do you determine the good ones from the bad ones? We'd advocate a simple scoring mechanism. How much effort would it be to implement this idea? What's the reward going to be if we do it? And what's the likelihood that it's actually going to be accepted by the right people in the business or the market or whatever it is? So score it in those 3 ways, or maybe other ways as well. Don't overdo it. Be realistic about the resource that you're going to need to actually not only run the project, but implement the benefits at the end, and communicate again with the business. So procurement's favorite ones may not be the favorite ones of the rest of the business. So, what is the business most enthusiastic about? And therefore, what are they most likely to support, and use that as well when deciding what to prioritize.
Yeah. And likelihood and probability is a good one. But I also think when you bring stakeholders into the discussion, it also brings in the reality of them having finite resources. And, if they're working on, increasing production efficiency or sustainability or whatever else it might be, even if you've got a saving that on paper delivers millions in savings, it might not be top of their list based on what their objectives are. And if you think in theory you could bring it in January because it doesn't involve any testing or whatever the barrier might be, but they don't have capacity to, run a production lot or anything like that until the second quarter, that can really dent your savings projection if you have alignment on that before you put your ideas into finance. I've been scarred by that in the past as well. That had a saving that's theoretically easy to deliver on paper, but you just can't get the resources from the rest of the business until later on in the year.
Yes. Yeah, that's it. Exactly right. And that's why you need to be realistic about resource, and not just your own resource, but everyone else's. And it's also why we would always advocate a 12-month rolling saving window. Like, I've worked at companies where you get a saving in December, you're only allowed to claim it for 1 month. And that's that. Funnily enough, no one introduced new projects in the last quarter of the year. So make sure you have a mechanism that encourages good behavior, and that you've got the same number of projects starting throughout the calendar, rather than there's a whole bunch starting in Q1 because that's what everyone wants to do.
Yeah, I like what you said about being able to have a rolling process. And okay, that obviously will evolve over time, and it will get better as you do it more and more. And stakeholder and supplier discussions become more of a regular occurrence rather than just a one-time per year activity. But I do like that, because the danger always is, as you say, if you start to do something in Q4, you're not going to deliver everything from the 1st of January. And that's just, setting yourself up then nice for the following year, because you've got a lot of projects that carry over, assuming that's the way that your organization reports savings. But yeah, I like that. So this all sounds very, very logical. And I'm sure a lot of people listening to this nodding along and have done some or most or even all of this if they're category managers in the past, in terms of how they go through their ideation and planning process. But probably not so many have used a web-based tool that's not, Excel or some sort of iteration of a spreadsheet on a SharePoint site. So can you maybe explain a few differences and advantages even of doing all of these steps in Provalido versus doing it in Excel or on SharePoint? So the obvious question is, okay, this all sounds great in theory, but how am I going to show ROI on something like, it's not as obvious as a spend analytics tool or an e-sourcing platform when it comes to getting the CFO to buy into spending money on something like this?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the big advantage of using something like Provalido for this is that you've got everything in one place. So right from your rough idea through to the implemented saving, it's all there. You've got visibility of everything that happened from that initial idea to the final implemented saving. You can see, did the timing change? Did the forecast change? And there are a few things that we've made sure we've done. So we've kept ideas separate to projects in the system for the very purpose that we don't want people to be afraid to put ideas into the system, because they're suddenly going to be in the forecast and they're going to be held accountable. So ideas are held separately. We've opened up ideas so that anyone can create an idea in the system if that's how you want it set up. So viewers, we don't charge for viewer licenses, so you can have hundreds of those if you want in the system, and they can all contribute to the ideas. They can then be validated, and when they're scored or prioritized, it can be turned into projects with the proper timing on, with a forecast. And then you've got your stage gates with the necessary approvals and governance in place. So it gives you control, it gives you visibility, and just a very easy and efficient way of managing that whole pipeline through. In terms of ROI, it's a tough one. Like you say, it's not necessarily a direct financial link. Our research does show, though, that 3 out of 4 of our customers see a significant uptick in reported savings when they start using the tool. And typically that increase is between 18 and 24%, which is significant. So if you're saving 10 million this year, you probably save 12 million by those rules. So, that's a huge ROI in a matter of days, not weeks or months.
And that's real, isn't it? Because it's proven that, and the famous saying goes, what gets measured gets managed. And you may be measuring it in procurement on your internal SharePoint site that's gated that nobody from operations or finance or any other team has access to. But once it's open and in an accessible app, and as you said, and I like that actually from a pricing mechanism, that if you're not charging users that are only observers or viewers of a project, then you're not then being forced to restrict access based on the number of user licenses that you have, which theoretically means, depending on how an organization would implement it, that anyone in the organization can go in and see, how are the projects doing that affect my department or my budget.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's a real thing that having that visibility there, everything's transparent, it encourages good behavior and it focuses people as well. So I don't think it's a coincidence that savings tend to go up when the tool's installed. Were those savings happening anyway and just not being reported? I don't know. But I tend to think probably there's a greater emphasis on that and those savings numbers have gone up. Plus, there's a correlation because you are freeing up people's time as well. So people are not surfing around trying to create reports, report out on their projects, put in savings in PowerPoint and all that sort of stuff. That's all done in the tool for you. So that extra time can actually be spent actually achieving the cost savings and working on those projects.
Which is what we're all paid to do ultimately. Do you find, is it pretty agnostic in terms of whether people use it to measure direct or indirect spend? And is it, industry sectors, do you typically see a larger number of customers in certain areas of industry?
We are agnostic. We see some customers only use it on indirects, others use it on both directs and indirects. It's not a part number level tool. So if you want to kind of pull out purchase price variance at a part number level, that's not what we're about. It's project based and a project maybe a large number of part numbers. But we see both. I would say actually the majority of our customers, or a big chunk, are in manufacturing or some sort of industrial sectors. But we do see FMCG, service sectors as well. So we are, and some public sectors. So we are agnostic. We'd say anywhere where you've got a medium to large procurement department, we say really you need, if you've got at least 10 people in your department that would be creating and updating projects, then probably you're going to get benefit from using a tool like ours.
Yeah, that makes sense actually, because I guess if you're a fairly immature or small procurement function, then there is an argument to say, well, we're relatively non-complex in our organizational structure, so we can just measure it in either in a spreadsheet or a more generic project management app, something like Trello or Asana or ClickUp or something like that. Whereas, as you say, once you get to a certain size, then that tends to make less and less sense the bigger you get and the more complex your operations get. Yeah, thank you. Awesome. Okay, so just to wrap this up, because I'm conscious of the time, just got a couple of quick fire questions that I ask everyone that comes onto the show. So, number one, if you could live anywhere in the world and money was no object, where would it be?
I'd probably split my time summer and winter, I think, because I don't like the cold. I'd love to live somewhere on the Stockholm archipelago in the summer and have a boat and sort of sail around. And I think I'd go somewhere in the southwest US in the winter, probably Arizona or somewhere like that, and enjoy the desert in the winter months.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm not a cold weather person either. And then finally, what's your favorite guilty pleasure? And the only rule here is you've got to keep it clean.
Guilty pleasure is probably pork scratchings. Pork scratchings. I know they're really, really bad for me, but I can't stop myself.
For anyone that's not from the UK listening to this, pork scratchings, yeah, except from the Birmingham area, which is where they make them traditionally. Pork scratchings are these like fried pieces of pork skin. I think they have them in Denmark. I've seen them in Germany too, and they have them also in the south of Spain as well. It's something similar. So I think there are a lot of countries that have similar things. But yeah, I love them too. Especially if you're in the pub and you're having a beer, it's the classic pub snack, isn't it? Yeah. Okay. So before we sign off, Paul, if anyone would like to maybe book a demo or even download your white paper or learn a little bit more about you, where's the best place that we should send them?
Just go to our website, provalido.com, and you can download the white paper there. You can arrange a demo, you can arrange a meeting with me if you like there. So all the information's on there.
Perfect. Paul, been a pleasure. Take care, and always good catching up.
All right. Thanks a lot, James.
Okay, that was Paul and Provalido and savings and pipeline management as we go into the final quarter of the year. I hope if you listen to this and you're already well into that process, that your savings plans are coming along magically. Thank you very much for listening to this week's episode. Don't forget, we've got our tech maps that you can download over store.procurementsoftware.site. They're completely free to download as a PDF version. And we've got one each for tech that serves the SME market, the mid-market, and the enterprise market, where Provalido is sat on the enterprise tech map. We'll be back same time next week. Until then, take care wherever you are in the world, and bye for now.